I'd like to call this the Council's Committee of the Whole to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Here.
Mr. Bowersox?
Here.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Present.
Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe? Ms. Stevenson?
Present.
Mayor Pressing?
Thank you. Are there any additions to the agenda by committee members? Okay. If not, is there a staff report this evening, Mayor or staff members? Yes. Okay. So we'll be hearing from Tom Carino, our Economic Development Specialist.
Yes, briefly, you have before you the Economic Development Activities Report for June 2007. Give everybody a moment to locate that. I know there's a lot of information before you. Just to hit on some items, we do have a request for proposal out for the beautification of Cunningham Avenue. That's been something that's been kicked around by council and staff. We've had some responses from some consultants, questions on the RFP, and we are moving forward on that. You do see some fit out happening at the Starbucks building. The exterior is complete. They're now fitting out the inside of the building. Should be opening shortly. Excuse me. There's also some activity happening at the corner of Windsor Road and Philo Road, activity on both the north and south side. Meyer is moving forward with site preparations. The Pines at Stone Creek Commons is also moving forward with both site preparation and building construction. And you also see site preparation happening at Myra Ridge and Windsor Road. So a lot of activity on the south end of the city. Also like to point out some other items of interest. The city and UBA did have the annual Build Urbana Home Parade on June 3rd, and 6 residential subdivisions participated. Economic Development has an intern helping out with some summer projects. Her name is Kate Nessie, and she's helping out with some of our marketing materials. Unless there are any questions, that's all I have for this evening.
Questions for Tom? Go ahead, Heather.
I don't have any questions, just a comment to drivers. I've been on Windsor Road and Philo and Myra Ridge, and it can get a little congested, especially at 5 o'clock. So just, there are kids in the Myra Ridge neighborhood, and so just heads up to watch your speeds. And there's police around, too.
Any other questions or comments on the Economic Development Report? Okay, if not, thanks, Tom. Thank you. Any other staff reports this evening? Okay. If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting.
So moved.
Second. We have a motion from Robert Lewis and a second from Lynn Barnes. Any discussion? Corrections? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? That carries. Next, we'll hear from members of the public, and let's see. In some cases, let's see, there was a few people who wanted to speak before the agenda item. Most people are here to speak about the Police Review Board, which is at the end of a fairly short meeting, so we'll get to it soon. There is one person, Robert Dunn, who said he would like to address it before the agenda items are presented. And then Dan Lewert, do you want to speak beforehand or at the time of the agenda item? Is Dan Lewert here? Okay, so I'll assume he wants to speak at the time of, since he's not here. Robert Dunn, if you could come forward and speak into the little microphone that's on the table here with your name and address, and limit your comments to 5 minutes.
Oh,
Yeah, the thing that doesn't actually look like a microphone.
okay. My name is Robert Dunn. I live at 804 South Urbana. This is going to be extremely difficult because I'm probably in a very extreme minority in this room right now, but I want to speak in opposition to the Civilian Review Board. I don't do this lightly. As someone who has grown up in the city of Urbana and has had dealings in the past during my youth years with the police. They have been nothing but positive. I understand that there's a lot of concerns about some individual officers and misconduct basing on them that, you know, individuals might be doing. But branding an entire police department and putting such restraints on them that they can't even do their job is not the answer. A possible answer is what some other cities have done, is doing more what is called community policing, where there are actual residents of the areas where people are having complaints who are policing like entire neighborhoods, not with, you know, guns or arresting, but, you know, making sure that, you know, bad stuff doesn't go on. And they're in contact with the neighborhood. But it seems that this idea, and from what a lot of the rhetoric has been, is that we are saying that our police departments are the enemy. I'm sorry to say, they're not our enemies. I thank each and every one of the members of the Urbana Police Department for keeping these streets safe, you know. It's a really tough job, you know. If I didn't have, you know, a back problem, I would join the department myself. Instead of trying to restrict the police department and pitting the community against the police force, why not, you know, recruit more people in places like the North End to be on the department that are in these areas, so that the police department can be more diverse and more represent this area. I don't know what else to say, but I'm extremely nervous because I'm probably like one of 3 people who in this room who's against this, but I just want to say that this is a bad idea, and there could be consequences down the road that are going to be far worse than the current situation. And so I encourage this council to vote this down. Thank you.
Any questions for Robert? If not, thank you for your input, Robert. I believe we had 2 more folks who said, okay, so everyone else wishes to speak at the time of the agenda item. If there's anyone else who'd like to speak, you'll have to fill out a form and give it to Phyllis Clark here. Next, we'll move on to ordinance number 2007-07083. This refers to an ordinance repealing ordinance number 2007-06048, which approved and authorized the execution of an annexation agreement. This refers to 1714 East Airport Road, petition by Gregory and Denise Reynolds, and we'll hear from Community Development.
This case will seem familiar to you.
Yeah.
You've heard it a couple of times, and it was heard by Plan Commission in May of this year, and then the Committee of the Whole, you guys yourselves, heard it on July 11th, 2007. Unfortunately, we had an error. We did not issue an official agenda specifying that there would be a public hearing, which we did this morning, just at the beginning of this, and the hearing was not announced at that meeting, and it was not open for public comment. So we are back here looking at a new ordinance. This one I have just handed out to you. It was not in the packet. It has a different title. It states that as an ordinance repealing the previous ordinance and then authorizing an execution of an annexation agreement. The new ordinance that I've just placed before you has 6 new whereases, 1 through 6 right at the beginning, that basically state that there was an error earlier, and that's the reason why we are repealing the previous ordinance. And then if you turn to page 3, the first item there that says Section 1, that states that you are repealing the ordinance from before, and the rest of it is pretty much exactly the same. If anyone would like, I could go over the Reynolds annexation case again.
Okay. Why don't we start with questions, and there might be more general questions. Do committee members have questions about this? We've seen it once before. Okay. Okay, we have a motion from Charlie Smythe. Is there a second? A second from Dennis Roberts. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That carries. Thank you. Next, we have a number of Community Development Commission items. And if I could ask staff maybe to go over all of them, and then we could consider taking them in omnibus fashion. John Snyder with Grants Management, and Kelly also with Community Development.
Basically, these are, there are different funding sources. The first three items are from Community Development Block Grant funding. The next four are from the community, it's actually the source for our agreement is Community Development Block Grant funding, but it's with the Consolidated Social Service Grant Program. And the last three are the Supportive Housing Program, and Kelly will explain the items for you.
The first three ordinances and agreements are for the Community Development Block Grant Public Facilities projects, which, as you will see, it's a women's fund, a woman's place for a window project, Disabled Citizens Foundation Developmental Services Center. It is their expanding of their training center on Clark Road, and the Urbana Park District's Victory Park redevelopment with the water line and such. So I don't know if you want to approve these first since they're all together and then go on to the next, or...
Okay, why don't we consider approving them in batches in the logical fashion? Go ahead.
Sure.
Okay, Dennis has a motion to move the first three.
The first three is ordinance 2007-07-073-074 and -075, community development.
Okay. We have a motion. Second from Lynn Barnes. Thank you. Any questions or discussion? Go ahead, Dennis.
Again, first, I've been a supporter of the progress in the city's support of the Victory Park redevelopment.
We're actually in stage 2 of the Victory Park program, and to date, the improved playground is in place, and the whole project has become a finalist for the City of Urbana for the Governor's Hometown Awards. And I think it just indicates that this project was worthy, is community-based, has support of the neighborhood and the city, and is therefore become a finalist for the Hometown Award, which will be having statewide officers visiting the park mid-month and reviewing the equipment and so the progress so far. So I support that especially.
Any other comments before we vote? Okay. If not, all those in favor of moving these three ordinances to council, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That carries. And you said that the next
The
batch
next
was
four.
4 of them? Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yep, the next four ordinances and agreements are also Community Development Block Grant, but they are the Consolidated Social Service funding. These are the four that we will be funding partially or completely, and that is Crisis Nursery, Francis Nelson Health Services, Mental Health Center of Champaign County, the Homeless Youth Program, and PACE, Persons Assuming Control of Their Environment. I had met with Carol Elliott, and we had placed all the different agencies under the appropriate that we felt, and these four meet also the priorities for the Community Development Commission. So we request that they be approved as written.
Questions or motions?
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead, Dennis.
I move that we agree to move ordinance 2007-07-076, 077, 078, and 079 forward to council with the recommendation of approval.
We have a motion from Dennis, a second from Charlie Smythe. Any discussion? If not, all those who support this say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That carries. And we have 3 final ordinances.
Right, and these ordinances and agreements over the supportive housing program, homeless families in transition. And it's with a Woman's Place and Women's Fund, Center for Women in Transition, and Salvation Army Services.
Questions or a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move that the committee forward to City Council with a recommendation for approving ordinance number 2007-07-080, 081, and 082, community grant.
We have a motion from Dennis, a second from Lynn Barnes. Any discussion? If not, all those who support sending this to council say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That carries. Thanks to community development. Next, we will hear from police and legal about ordinance number 2007-07-084. This refers to an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute an intergovernmental agreement for animal impound services with the county of Champaign for fiscal years 07 and through 09. You can flip a coin to see who goes first. Go ahead.
City Legal is advised that I'm the spokesperson for this one. This authorizes the mayor to enter into a new 2-year agreement, which follows our previous 2-year agreement with Champaign County Impound. The contract remains essentially the same as it has for the past 2 years, with the exception of a $7,000 a year reduction in our fees.
Any questions? Brandon?
Yeah, Chief, I did have one question about it. A citizen asked this, and when I saw this item on the agenda, I thought the same thing. It's good that we share services with the county and have one animal impound. That makes a lot of sense. But I also wonder, why do we as a city have our own animal control officer? I assume the county has one. I assume Champaign has one. Has there ever been a history of possibly sharing and combining these 3 positions into a countywide officer?
Actually, it's quite the opposite. Everybody used to have their own animal control. Champaign did, Champaign County did, we did. Champaign and County have since combined. Champaign is contracting all of their animal control services with the county. We have elected not to do that at this time.
And was there a particular reason? I mean, I know Chelsea does a great job, and people are very happy with her.
Chelsea.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I entertain a motion to send this to council. We have a motion. Okay, thank you, Heather. Motion from Heather. Second from Lynn Barnes. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That carries. We get to the last ordinance on our agenda for this evening, and this is ordinance number 2007-07-085, an ordinance establishing a civilian review board for the city of Urbana, Illinois. What we typically do is maybe hear from staff, which might answer some questions that are from public, but without getting into discussion at all as a committee. We have a number of people who'd like to speak. So if we could just hear a report from staff and the mayor, we'll go into public input, and then at that point the committee will have a chance to debate.
Okay, I'd just like to give a little brief history of this. It was discussed by a citizens group that I belonged to a number of years ago, and at that point we didn't think we had enough votes on the city councils to get this passed, but after I got elected mayor, it became an issue when the FOP had a candidates forum, and we discussed the issue of a civilian review board for the police. And when I got to be mayor, I appointed a task force to study this, which was headed by Esther Patt, and she did a really fine job. And we started out thinking that it was going to be something where we'd hear from the officer and hear from the citizen, but as we went through it and discussed it over a period of about a year, because there are certain statutes in Illinois that dictate how discipline of police officers is supposed to be handled, we concluded that the best role for this group would be as sort of an appellate level group. So someone who is unhappy with the way they were treated by the Urbana Police, and I would like to tell you that we think we have an excellent police department, and we had people on the task force. We had Chief Bealey. I don't know if he was the chief at that point. And we had Anthony Cobb, who was at that time the head of the FOP, and a wide range of people from around the city. And we concluded that the whole thrust of this is that an organization really doesn't just investigate itself. There should be an outside means of investigation of complaints. And we concluded that rather than looking at an individual officer, since we don't have the right to do discipline, only the chief can do that, the real function could be to review the process. And if we have a pattern of problems, that would be something that an outside agency could pick up. We did send some people to a conference on civilian review boards. There are civilian review boards in some of the finest police departments in this country and around the world. And we found that there is no one specific model, but it also is important to realize that a city like San Jose, California, which is much bigger than Urbana, has very few complaints, and they have one person who's their reviewer. So we don't expect to see a lot of complaints, but we do think that this is a safety valve, and it's a way to, I think, kind of have the police department have improving relations with the community. So that's the intent. And it was drafted, the task force came up with a report, and then it was drafted into legal form by our former city attorney, Jim Gitz, and then it's been worked on by Ron O'Neill and Todd Rent, our human relations director, and Vasilia Clark, our human resources director. So now's the chance for more public comment and questions from the council, but perhaps Ron O'Neill and Todd Rent would like to comment on it at this point.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I just need to make some small changes in language before we begin this phase of it. If you could I'll turn to page 3 and look at section 19-25E. And in E, it says, a violation of these provisions may constitute grounds for immediate removal of the member at the discretion of the mayor, except that violation of section, and it should read C, not D. The violation of section C of this subsection shall constitute grounds for immediate dismissal, is how that should read. Then, moving on to page 9, under administration and enforcement, section 1933, findings and conclusions, subsection C should read as follows: where the members find by a majority vote, and then you should strike that is in that, excuse me, I'm sorry. Let me back up and start over again. Remanded for further investigation, where the members find by a majority vote that there exists new relevant evidence that was not presented to or investigated by the chief of police or his/her designee, comma, and that it is in the community's best interest to do so, comma, it may remand a matter back to the chief for further investigation or consideration. So essentially, we're adding the words, and that it is in the community's best interest to do so. Page 10, section 1936, subsection D. I'm sorry, 10. I apologize. 10. Section
Yeah, just give us a section, because
Okay.
we might.
Oh, okay. All right. Section 1936 is what it is, whatever page that might be on for you all.
Bottom of 7.
Okay. Subsection D, second sentence, the board may discontinue its strike investigation, put review into a complaint for lack of interest if the complainant fails to attend the hearing. I believe it.
Any other comments from staff before we open it up for public input?
Well, we were actually thinking that we would, rather than make a presentation, it would be better to, if it's okay with you all, to hear the public's input and answer your questions, your specific questions about language that's in the ordinance.
Okay, great. So we'll move to, let's see, sorry, lose things. We'll move to the public input portion of this evening. First, we'll hear from Brian Dolinar of 303 West Locust Street in support of the CPRB. And I won't repeat myself every time. If folks can just limit their comments to 5 minutes, I will let you know when you're getting close, when you're a minute away from that time, because we have a lot of people to hear from, but we definitely want to hear from you.
My name is Brian Doliner, and I live at 303 West Locust in Urbana. Among my many hats, I'm a part-time professor at the University of Illinois at Parkland College. I work for the Independent Media Center and the Public Eye newspaper. I also work with CU Citizens for Peace and Justice and the Coalition for CPRB. I'm distributing tonight a copy of an article from the Chicago Sun-Times that appeared in the last week, and it's noting the problems with the CPRB in Chicago, which they've had for several years. And there's a new coalition for police accountability, which is pushing for state legislature on torture, given the realizations of Sergeant Burge in Chicago, who tortured over 100 black men on the South Side, and there's a desperate need for a similar kind of legislation in Champaign County after the discoveries of Sergeant Myers and his abuses with a taser in the Champaign County jails. But particularly of concern here is in the next couple of weeks there's going to be discussion before the Champaign City Council of the Police Review Board there in Chicago. And it's actually Mayor Daley who's bringing forth several reforms. And I'll hear a quote from the article in which they're addressing 3 of their concerns. Number 1, they're concerned with asserting the supremacy of the ordinance for the Police Review Board over police contracts. Number 2, they are concerned with ensuring that the agency, the Police Review Board agency, rather than the police superintendent, has control of police abuse reviews. Number 3, to allow public participation and selection of the new review agency head and transparency in the agency's record keeping. And I'm concerned that the proposal for a police review board in Urbana, while I'm very much in support of it and happy to see it finally materialize, I'm concerned that without investigative powers, without power of subpoena, without public disclosure of complaints and public disclosure and transparency of the process, years down the road we're going to be facing the same problems and same reforms that they're now facing in Chicago. I'd like these to be addressed now rather than in the future. And here to really afraid that much of the teeth in the Police Review Board in Urbana has been taken out in negotiations with the police union, and we're concerned in putting the teeth back into the Police Review Board. Thank you.
Any questions for Brian? Okay, thank you. If not, we'll hear from Yvonne Ruiz of South Walnut Street on the Civilian Police Review Board. And I believe Yvonne distributed a copy of his talk to all of us. So you
Right,
should have a copy in front of you.
I will be addressing the council, but I also have things to address not only the council but the people of Champaign and the people of Urbana with my statement. I recently attended a meeting of the Champaign-Urbana Citizens for Peace and Justice. This group meets at the post office building in downtown Urbana, and it is a group of citizens from all walks of life concerned about the racial inequities in our local judicial system. This day was especially busy. In attendance was an African-American couple who came to give their story about the continual harassment and mistreatment of the husband at the hands of the Champaign Police Department. The man described how in one encounter he had been groped in the groin from behind by a police officer. He said it was the officer in charge. Of the 3 or 4 that were there, the one that was in charge of these officers. Before they let him go, they told him to go after this happened. After having his head pushed hard to the ground by an officer on another day, blood spewing from the man's forehead fell on the hand of an officer, and that was interpreted as quote-unquote spitting blood at an officer. I believe it's a felony or something like this. The man said there was no blood in his mouth. He is now facing jail sentence for this and related charges. Another attendee recounted how police from the same department had recently riddled the siding of a home with bullets and wanted to know how to go about getting the city to repair the damage. A fugitive had run into that home to escape the police. A female resident ran from the home with the baby in hand, telling police there were 2 children still in the house. Minutes later, about 10 minutes, she said, the police nonetheless shot at the residents with the children inside. They were underneath a bed. We were told the police ransacked the house. Food taken from the freezer had the contents spilled on the floor. The refrigerator was unplugged. Clothes and furniture were strewn around. The children were simply terrified, we were told. An Urbana man gave an update on his continual trial, the third and more like a saga, for what appears to be a politically motivated persecution in response to his filing a federal civil rights lawsuit for actions taken by authorities after he videotaped police interacting with African American males. This trial has drawn national attention because of a persistence in prosecuting a weak case against a man who defended himself in the first trial. He was a pro se defense, and he did this in Springfield. The trial venue was moved to Springfield, Illinois, ending in a hung jury for that trial. A judge ruled that at the second trial, the man did not receive competent representation by the paid attorney, who is now being sued for return of the fees. Another man was unable to attend. He served a 6-month jail term for his inability to pay traffic tickets. We were told this man had also been a taser victim of Sergeant Myers while in custody at the Champaign County Jail. A Champaign County attorney, or I should say the attorney representing Champaign County, Susan McGrath, settled with this taser victim for $5,000 so he could remain silent about what happened. Another man, a white male who complained about being tased by the same officer, was also offered money, but he refused the offer. A comment was made at the meeting about how other taser victims at the county jail have yet to come forward with their stories. If you're a white middle class, these vignettes probably have a ring of surreality. A local white commodity trader recently told me how he could not fathom anything of the sort happening to him, his family, or to anyone that he knows. And I'm glad for that man. Unfortunately, for the people in these stories, all African American, the incidents described are a daily occurrence in Champaign-Urbana. Police routinely lie in their police reports, and importantly, police engage in what has been termed testifying, or giving false testimony under oath. The result, a disproportionate number of people of color in our jails. Many of these people are patently innocent. There is an undeniable need for a Citizens Police Review Board. Citizens must have a channel to address their complaints about the police misconduct outside of internal police department review. But what cannot be forgotten is that police do not act in a social vacuum. When a law enforcement officer routinely tortures citizens with electrical currents, that officer must have an understanding that he or she will get away with their actions. The community is sending a message that it's okay for that officer to mistreat those less fortunate and powerless, many times people of color. The message I have for members of that quote-unquote larger society, yes, it includes those of you in Urbana and Champaign who are found praying in churches on Sunday mornings and the like. The message I have is that you use whatever means you have at your disposal to address the inequities that I brought forward today. Your call letter, in-kind, or monetary contribution can make a difference. Your indifference can be interpreted as tacit approval of abhorrent police misconduct. And do remember that police misconduct can happen to you regardless of your ethnicity or station in life. There are many videos circulating the country about this phenomenon that may prove my point. In some, a civilian police review board with meaningful, read with teeth, citizen oversight can address frontline police behavior. But more importantly, it is the larger community, yes, you, resident of Urbana or Champaign, that has to send a message to those in power that you will simply not tolerate police misconduct. Period. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Are there questions for Yvonne Ruiz?
I'll take questions. Yeah. Anybody have questions?
Thanks for your input. Appreciate it. Next, we'll hear from Belden Fields of 706 West Pennsylvania, and then from Aaron Amons after that.
Got me too far west. It's 206.
Oh, 206. I
handwriting.
should know.
I have me too.
206 West Pennsylvania.
Yes. I want to urge you, the mayor said that you had looked at a number of these policies that had been enacted elsewhere. And I would encourage you to look at some of the social science literature as well. I think it is perhaps even more revealing of the problem that one is facing. I myself have written in scholarly works on this, but I'd like to direct your attention to a book by Paul Chevigny, Chevigny. The title is Edge of the Knife, Police Violence in the Americas. It's a comparative study. Chevigny is a professor at the John Jay School of Criminal Justice in New York, and I think it will give you certain insights. It goes into the recruitment, the training, and the practices in police departments on a comparative basis. I found it extremely revealing in my own work. I want to support the idea of a police review board, but I have to say that I do have some issues that I want to take with it as it is presented. I think it could be improved. One of them has to do with investigations, and the mayor, when you talked about the need for it, you did say there has to be some investigation of what went on. I would prefer to see an investigation that could take place outside of the police department investigating itself. It doesn't mean that in every instance there would have to be an external investigation. But as I read this document, it pretty well precludes any outside investigation. And I mean, it seems to me obvious, because the mayor had said herself that a police department should not be left simply itself alone to investigate interior matters. It seems this would be a fairly simple matter. I mean, it would be easier, I think, almost to get someone who could help in certain cases in investigation, given that we have on campus the University Police Training Institute, we have the law school. We do have people, I think, who could come in on a contractual basis and investigate certain things when it was deemed that the police department itself should not be left alone to investigate. At the very minimum, if the Civilian Review Board itself could not initiate the investigation, I think it should be able to go to the mayor and request the mayor, using her executive power, to contract with an investigator. As I say, I don't think in every single case this would be necessary. But as I read it, it's all precluded in this document, and I think that's bad public policy. I mean, that was, as I say, the mayor's initial statement as to why we would need this. We need some kind of oversight. This doesn't call into question in any way the quality of the present chief or any future chiefs or whatever. I think as a matter of public policy, that needs to be possible. A second problem I have with this, and it actually relates to two things. It's 1922C. No person with a criminal felony conviction or plea shall be eligible to serve on Civilian Review Board. The reason that I have difficulty with, well, I have difficulty on a number of grounds, but one of them, it seems to me, is our basic philosophy ought to be, even if people do commit crimes and they pay their debt to society, when they come out, we want to integrate them as citizens to the full extent possible. I could see maybe a certain restriction there, that 10 years after conviction, plea, or release, whichever is later. I happen to know many people who are outstanding citizens, including clergy people in this community, who have been convicted of felonies. I also would prefer that this review board also deal with certain policy issues and not just individual complaints. And there's one policy issue I have in mind in particular, and that is the way in which the felony obstruction of justice charge is used by police departments. This is not only locally, but it is also locally. And since I have been watching more closely the policing and judicial systems, I have come across, I can't tell you how many African American people have been charged with felony obstruction of justice. We have a young woman in educational policy studies at the university, an African American young woman. Her friend was being arrested by a police officer. She reached out to touch her friend's arm, to hold her friend's arm. She was charged with felony obstruction of justice. We had Terrell Layfield, who was arrested on a drug charge, felony drug charge. They didn't convict him on that, but they used the felony obstruction of justice. He gave the wrong name, but police officer. It got him 5.5 years in jail. He committed suicide in our county jail. He was one of the 6 deaths that we have had in the last 3 or 4 years in our county jail. This is a technique which I think is overused. It's used to get people to plead guilty to heavier charges. It is being unfairly used. As I say, the cases that have come to my mind since I've been looking at this have all been within the African American community. If this young woman who had grabbed her friend, her arm, actually they got that quashed finally, largely through the efforts of the university. Now our community people have the university behind them. She wouldn't have been able to serve on this. So I think this restriction is far too great and overlooks one of the problems that exists within the criminal justice and policing systems we have. So I'd urge us again to, one, strike that out and have some different language where people who for 10 years have, turned their lives around, fine, can serve on this. And secondly, that Civilian Review Board take up issues like excessive charging.
Sheldon,
yeah.
you're at about 7.5 minutes, so.
I'm sorry, okay. The only other thing that I wanted to raise was the willfully making false allegations before the charge. There's an asymmetry here where this person can be prosecuted for this, whereas the police officer against whom the allegation is being made does not even have to appear, is not under oath. I think that we don't need that. Sorry for overtaking my time.
That's fine. Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Field? Okay. If not, we'll hear from Aaron Amons of 1108 North Busey Avenue.
Good evening. Good evening. How y'all doing? So much tension in the room. I don't understand it. Golly. We're all citizens, right? I am Aaron Ammons, a.k.a. Brother A-Dub of CU Citizens for Peace and Justice. I live at 1108 North Busey in Urbana, and I'm here to say stop the violence. Y'all can see it on my hat there, right? Can we get a close-up of that? I want to say to the Urbana City Council and the Urbana Police Department that I respect your knowledge and courage to do the jobs that you do every day, serving us in the city of Urbana. I truly do. I want to make sure that that's clearly understood. Though I may not agree with all of the tactics and policies, I respect your posts. I also take very seriously my post and my duties as a citizen of the United States of America. Therefore, I must address both of you, both bodies of elected and selected officials, about the proposed Citizens Police Review Board. Among countless other reasons that you've heard already and that you're going to hear tonight, I want to say why I do not support the current proposal for a Citizens Police Review Board. And that is the fact that the Urbana Police Department has proposed, and this council has accepted, a clause that discriminates against persons with felony convictions. And I would like to read from the Human Rights Ordinance, and I think it's very ironic or fitting that Belden Fields came up before me, being an author of a human rights book and addressing this same issue, and we didn't plan that at all. But the discrimination clause says in Article 3, Discrimination, Division 1, under generally, Section 1237, Intent and Purpose. It is the intent of the City of Urbana in adopting this article to secure an end in the city to discrimination, including but not limited to discrimination by reason of race, color, creed, class, national origin, religion, sex, age, marital status, physical and mental disability, personal appearance, sexual preference, family responsibilities, matriculation, political affiliation, prior arrest or conviction records, or source of income, or any other discrimination based upon categorizing or classifying a person rather than evaluating a person's unique qualifications relevant to an opportunity. I erased the rest of that because I didn't think that it mattered really, because you say it only relates to housing, employment, credit, and access to public accommodations. What about situations like this? What about the fact that a person such as myself with a felony conviction, ironically, as you all were happily talking about how you did the proposal with the fire and rescue team, that I'm not allowed to be a fireman, I'm not allowed to be a policeman, I'm not allowed to serve on the city council with a felony conviction. And so it's very disturbing to me that such a progressive community and a progressive council who supports gay and lesbian rights, tenant and landlord rights, bike paths, and anything else that we can think of, basically, would continue a practice of discrimination and disenfranchisement that is so blatantly obvious to all people involved. There was another definition here of discrimination that I wanted to clearly lay out for you. And that definition, as it relates to arrest or convictions, to me, I don't understand how, although the mayor, whom I trust dearly and I respect dearly, will be the one who has the final decision on who gets on this board will still look like the city council, have a clause of discrimination in it as well. And that is the reason why I would not support the current proposal as it exists, because it says part of the qualifications would be that a member would have to have a reputation of fairness and integrity and a sense of public service. So my question would be, can a person with a felony conviction, say 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 years ago, not have a reputation of fairness, integrity, and sense of public service? Are you saying that I don't have a reputation of fairness, integrity, and a sense of public service? I think it's a legitimate question. So to go on, with the undisputable knowledge, working knowledge, that there are presidents generals, congressmen, CEOs, police officers, judges, lawyers who commit felonious acts, yet they do not bear the burden of a new scarlet letter of felony conviction. Knowing that there are such laws on the books that ironically prevents me from, as I said earlier, serving as a firefighter, police officer, or on this city council, I find it extremely disturbing that you all would accept a proposal by the department that says that a person with a felony conviction could not serve on this count or on this civilian review board. Therefore,
Aaron, you're at 5 minutes, so if you
okay.
could just get to
Nope.
the other
Yes,
points you
indeed.
want to get to.
That is the point that I wanted to make, and my proposal would be that you all go back into negotiations with the police department, and that you operate from the position that people with felony convictions are not out to get the police department, nor that retired officers are going to support the police no matter what. I think we must operate and have faith in the truth and trust that the good people of Urbana will speak and operate in the best interest of the city of Urbana. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions for Aaron Amons? Okay. If not, next we'll hear from Stuart Levy of 1108 Foley Avenue in Champaign. Stuart.
I guess I'd like to say first that I'm very glad that Urbana is considering such a proposal, and I'm partly speaking here as a Champaign resident in hopes that you can set us a good example. There are a number of problems that I've seen and others have seen, and I'm sure we'll talk about in the proposal as written. So I'd just like to mention a couple that might not get so much emphasis. One problem with the operation of the review board is that it can't consider an individual case until the police have finished considering it. And in contentious cases, this seems like a troublesome way to go, since the police might well be inclined just to delay issuing a report until it was too late to find people who had good memories of the incident, or just in the hopes that the problem would go away if delayed long enough. And but it doesn't seem a very good way either to simply set a time limit for the police investigation, since investigation might take a long time. That would be one approach, to set a time limit. Another would be to allow the review board to begin using whatever information the police had after some amount of time had passed. But I hope there will be some way to address the indefinite delaying of hearings. Another is, since of course complaints often arise in contentious cases, is to make sure that complainers know their rights. And I guess there would be a natural way to, hand people who are complaining pieces of paper that would tell them what their rights were. But I hope there might be a provision added that would call for prominent posting in the police station so that complainants would know what their rights were, that that filing a complaint was a legitimate thing for them to do, that they should expect to get a written copy of their complaint, that something such as the police review board, the civilian review board, exists and could also hear the complaint, that there were other venues that they could make a complaint, things like this that would be posted prominently, so that people wouldn't be facing only a potentially hostile person while filing the complaint. So anyway, thank you, and hope for your good consideration.
Thanks, Stuart. Any questions for Stuart Levy? Okay. If not, we'll hear from Barbara Kessel of 904B East Colorado Avenue. Barb. And then we'll hear from Treva Ellison.
I want to speak to having an independent police civilian review board with subpoena powers, which it does not have right now. But to me, independent means having subpoena powers. And I want to speak to it as being a very good thing for the police, as well as the citizens, for whom it is basically set up. And I speak out of my 20 years of teaching in Chicago city colleges, and also working with the Chicago CAPS program, which is a community police program all over the city of Chicago. And when I started working with CAPS, I have to confess I did not have a very good image of policemen, because I knew I lived in the land of John Burge, the torturer in Chicago. But as I worked with the police, my respect for them grew, and I met some very fine police sergeants and officers and lieutenants as I worked with the CAPS program. And so my respect for them grew, and my understanding of the problems they faced grew. And I ended up knowing that the greatest protection a policeman has is his or her relationships with the other police and with the community. That's a much greater power for them than the guns they carry. And a lot of them know that too. So as a community college teacher, there were a couple of parallels to policemen that I drew from my experience as a teacher, as a city professional. The first is the principle that you must not break ranks and snitch or whistle blow on your peers. This is true for teachers who are in unions. It's true for everybody who works for the city and is in a union. And if you do, you will be shunned. You will not have the cooperation of your peers that you need to get your job done. Or worse, much worse. This is why you have to have subpoena powers, so that the police, when subpoenaed, are free to tell the truth. So, because of that, when students would come to me in trouble with other teachers or complaining about other teachers, I would have to send them through the proper channels. I could not help them as they thought I might by going to the teacher or going to my department chair and saying such and such teacher's doing such and such bad stuff. They're drunk in the classroom, for example. They're favoring white students, or, various things that were very harmful. I couldn't say that. So I would tell the student how to go through the channels, and the channels had been set up in my later years so that, my later years there, the channels were set up to be circular so that you go round and round and round, and you never, if you're a student, you never get your complaint settled or resolved. Now, the second principle that I discovered is what I call the few bad apples syndrome, or anyone lower down can be thrown to the wolves. So the administration, in my later years again, we began to have kinds of discipline problems in classrooms. Really, they're not discipline problems. They're like incidents of disorder and violence. And these came about in the 90s, partly because a policy was made to give money to people who were on SSI and had been released from mental hospitals, couldn't work. They gave them money to go to school. So we got a lot more students who were mentally ill. And when I went to the administration at one point, I went to a certain person called the special needs counselor. And I said, I need some advice and some help as to how to deal with this student who's acting very strangely in class. And she said, "Oh, I know just what you mean. You have to document everything." And I said, "What do you mean document everything? What's that about?" And she said, "Well, in case there's something that happens, you're covered." Covered. Oh, from lawsuits. This isn't the help I was asking for. I wanted to deal with the student and help him, as well as my class. Shortly after that, we had a mandatory faculty meeting around the subject of discipline. It was called discipline. And there were two messages. First, you do not have the power as a teacher to tell someone they can't come back to your classroom. Kick them out, in other words. You don't have that power anymore, as we used to have. And the other thing is, don't send anyone to the dean. In other words, you're on your own, folks. Whatever you can think of, just do it. Now, how does this apply to police? I want to make clear I am generalizing, but I am not saying anything specific about the administration, which I do not know a thing about in Urbana of the police or in Champaign. I'm not talking about the administration. I'm talking about in general when you are a frontline person, teacher, doctor, or police. We have all been conditioned to the few bad apples idea. We've had that nationally. It was a few bad apples that did something at Abu Ghraib, right? It wasn't anything policy. And I think that the police are in a very tough position where I suspect a lot of the policies they have to work with are too vague, or they are operating on a no policy until something bad happens policy, and then it gets kind of written retroactively. I'm not saying this happens because I don't know. I am just generalizing from my own experience that the police are often on their own. And it seems to me that something wonderful could come out of the Police Civilian Review Board for police if the review board can independently subpoena police, handle complaints, and get to that level, which Belden referred to, of good policy that will help everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Any questions for Barbara Kessel? If not, next we'll hear from Treva Etlison at 703 East Harding Drive about the Citizen Review Board.
Hi, good evening. I just want to discuss a few thoughts I had about the Citizen Police Review Board. A couple points I want to address. First, I guess just starting with the process through which someone is criminalized has a very profound effect on them, not just physically, emotionally, all those things, yet it seems to be so far removed from public oversight, so that's a problem. And also want to speak to this idea of it being citizens versus the police. I would like to think as a citizen that the police have the same interests that I do in terms of safety, and so I don't think this is a camp issue. I think that as a community, having a review board is necessary and is a good thing. And then this idea that there's concerns about the police, I want to say that they're not just concerns. Like, there have been cases of material consequences that have occurred to real people in this community as a result of the lack of involvement that the public has in the oversight of the police. And so I guess just in short, what we need as community members is a seat at the table where these processes that so profoundly affect what happens to our bodies is made. And what we don't need is a three-legged seat, which I think right now the current proposal as it is kind of functions that way, but an actual chair with four legs that we can sit at. So I guess the first thing is, it seems like access to police reports, subpoena power, putting a time limit, these are all things other people said, putting a time limit on the police investigations is something that needs to happen. And I also want to really advocate keeping it inclusive and having public meetings so that the Citizen Police Review Board doesn't meet in closed session but is open and accessible to the public, and that the results of the findings are made public and that the actual existence of the review board is highly publicized so that people who want to be in the community can get them, people in the community who want to be involved can get involved. Also, another thing to push for really is just breaking the culture of silence that exists in the community in terms of people who are marginalized and how their voices don't get heard. So one, I think there needs to be some form of advocacy for complainants so that there's a lot of fear surrounding making a complaint against the police, so that there needs to be some form of advocacy, and there needs to be some means by which people who speak languages other than English or who do not write will have some way to effectively communicate their complaints. So if there's someone who can take verbal statements or someone who can translate from English to Spanish, etc., I think that is something important that needs to be there. And then I guess just recognizing that there's fear involved on the part of the complainants, and I really want to push for some form of advocacy and to ensure that police officers who currently have complaints against them aren't involved in the police review board. And also, piggybacking off what someone else said, is to take away this, another thing that feeds into this cultural fears, like this idea of being prosecuted for false complaints, and I think someone else already made that point. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Trevor. Any questions? Next, we'll hear from Jerome Chambers from the NAACP, 608 West Green Street, number 4. It's Mr. Chambers.
Good evening. I am Jerome Chambers, President of Champaign County NAACP. Our national meeting is going on now, the 98th annual NAACP convention. If it's in your mind, or if you ask yourself, well, why aren't you there? I would love to be there. But the situation as it stands today requires me to be on the home front. National people take care of national things, and I've been to those meetings. But what I'm concerned about now, I think it involves all of us enduring poverty, a biased criminal justice system, denial of voting rights, unequal education, disparities in earning power and job opportunities, and the lack of health care. That's what minorities are concerned about more than anything else. But the reason that I'm here and decided to speak, thought about this today, is among many modern day travesties, and among them, I should say, are the ideologies of well-meaning people. You've heard the ideologies of all of the people who spoke before me. Some situations cause residents of whole communities to be influenced beyond the laws and statutes of its governance. However, the idea of a review board, whether it is of a complaint advisory nature or other, great care must be given in choosing which model reflects the good sense of that community. As communities go, in this sense, so go public awareness, support, and the success of the endeavor. The subject of reviewing anything has been known to become highly incensed and sometimes volatile because of intent or purpose. If the research that is necessary for such a review board or committee has met certain criteria, which employs a process that is credible, impartial, and balanced, it would make sense for the most part to move ahead for the good of the people. However, as a word of caution, there are the pro-police and anti-police factions. They're everywhere. These factions that tend to thwart the validity of questionable action, further inhibiting due process of legitimate allegations. Both mayor and council members have to make certain that race and gender bias do not become a factor in the transparency of the inquiry process. Therefore, diversity in its broadest context should take precedent alongside fairness and integrity. Public comment or outcry will be determined by the efficiency of the work of this board or committee, as the case may be. If the public is kept abreast as much as possible about the work, especially through outreach, what was once political debate can become an asset to better relations in the community. Overall, your work is cut out for you, and may you be expeditious and discerning in your endeavor of citizen oversight. I salute you, Mayor Pressing, and Urbana City Council and the task force for your bravery in undertaking this task. Thank you for this space, and you are in my prayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Questions for Reverend Chambers? Okay. Next, we'll hear from John Wayson of 601 West Springfield Avenue, number C in Champaign.
Well, good evening. That's Watson, by the way. And I speak not only for myself, but as the longest surviving member of this coalition that began to meet in the summer of 2001, of which Mayor Pressing was also a part. This issue actually predates our little coalition. I know that it goes back to at least the mid-90s. But I've been working on this for 6 years, and I've studied all the literature, well, not all the literature because it's voluminous, but a good deal of the literature on citizen police review boards. And first of all, I want to thank Mayor Pressing and whoever else is responsible for getting the process this far. I'm grateful and somewhat validated. But at the risk of sounding ungrateful, this ordinance, I think, does not reflect the recommendations for the most effective citizen police review board, or indeed of your own task force that met. And some of the objections to it have been pointed out. The most salient, the most obvious, to begin, you want it to be effective. I assume that if you're going to pass this ordinance, you want to create a police review board that is successful, that's effective. All the literature says that it has to, in order to be effective, it has to have the maximum amount of independence from the police department. All of the literature says that, and some of these things have been mentioned, it needs to have subpoena power to call witnesses. It needs to have some means of investigation to find out who the witnesses might be. Otherwise, all you've got, the way this is written right now, all you've got is the police officer doesn't have to testify. Only the police chief or representative of the police chief and the complainant. So it's going to be like a he said, she said thing unless you've got other independent corroborating witnesses. You have to find those witnesses and you have to create a process by which they can be compelled, if necessary, to come and testify. Otherwise, you got nothing. And so I see nothing about subpoena power in here. That's been mentioned. I see no mention of a budget whatsoever of any kind. Now, maybe that's created by some separate process. I don't know how the legislative process works. But all of the literature, again, said that there needs to be some means of an independent investigation, in some cases, not all cases. It occurs to those of us who have discussed it that probably if you're going to have a hearing on a specific complaint, you need a stenographer to take a record of the hearing. And there's probably many things that I haven't thought of that would require some budget, and that isn't mentioned. And finally, another major thing that leaped out at us is the thing about how this independent process. Now, it says in another place that it's the hearings themselves are private, and that any testimony adduced at the hearings cannot be used in any other disciplinary matter or, criminal proceedings or anything. So I question the provision in there that if there's a criminal case or even the threat of a civil suit, this can be suspended. And we all know that civil suits can drag on for 5 or 10 years. By that time, everybody's memory of the incident is gone. So I wonder what the justification for that is, since it does provide that the testimony can't be used in any other context. Those of us who talked about this after we got the draft ordinance, including a couple members of the task force, we sent some recommendations. I believe this is Mr. Grant over here. I didn't hear any of our recommendations reflected in the amended language tonight, so I'm wondering how the process works. And basically, I speak in support of a Citizen Police Review Board, but I urge you to make it the most effective police review board that you can, or else it seems kind of pointless.
Okay. Charlie, you had a question, then the mayor.
Yeah, John, are you referring to the rather lengthy email we got from
You got a Ricky Baldwin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that who you're referring to?
Yeah, I have my own, but that reflected our consensus.
Okay.
The most important concern.
It was, it was sent an
He
email.
was supposed to have emailed it to all of you.
Okay, so, I'll make a note to myself to make sure it gets.
And I have my own, if anybody wants to get a copy of my particular concern.
Or if you could email it to us, and
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, that'd be a good way to get it to us. I'll make sure Ricky's gets to everybody.
John, if you send it to me, I can send it out as well if you have difficulty finding the emails.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Mayor.
John, I call your attention to section 19-41, the title of which is budget.
I can't hear. 19.
I call your attention to section 19-41, the title is budget. So it is mentioned in there. And I think maybe
I don't have mine only goes 19-39.
Maybe it has been, revised in the latest. We'll have to get you the most latest version. But I think the intent at the end of the task force was that we are going to be looking at the system rather than saying the guilt or innocence of a particular officer. We're going to look at a pattern of, is the system working?
I thought it was both, but
okay. But there were constraints which the city attorney might want to comment on.
Other questions for John, or was there comments from staff? Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Next, we'll hear from Gabriel Stanton of 1109 East Oaks Road in Urbana.
I just want to acknowledge that I don't have any problems with the police department myself, and I know quite a few officers that are doing an excellent job, but I'm aware of the tendency of groups to protect other members and particularly those in leadership positions to protect the unity of the department and keep a good public face. So if there's a Citizens Police Review Board that has subpoena powers, then it's able to then it might be able to go beyond these tendencies toward groupthink, and I guess that's it. Thanks.
Thanks. Questions for Gabriel? All right. I just noticed that Daniel Lewert didn't choose to address the committee, but asked that his position be entered in the record as supporting the Civilian Review Board. And that's the last public input slip that I have. Mr. Parsons from the Urban League, you're welcome to step forward. If you could just give that to the clerk, thanks.
Good evening. I'm Tracy Parsons, president of the local Urban League, and it's really ironic. I talked to my colleague today in Seattle, and they were having a very similar meeting tonight about this very topic, except I believe the police chief is under a little bit more fire than ours is at this point. I've been the president of the Urban League for about 13 years, and this issue has been on the radar of our organization and really a hot topic in the community really since I've arrived here. Let me say my appreciation to Mayor Pressing for bringing this issue forward and convening those of us that served on the committee. I did serve on the committee that worked to put the ordinance together. While I am not here speaking on behalf of the committee, I'm here as an individual that served on it. Just wanted to share that with this body as you deliberate what you're going to do. I will say that all of us came to the table with our personal agendas and our personal preferences for what we wanted to see, and how, from the community perspective, our first few meetings were about how strong and independent all of this needed to be, and police officers were very protective of, their rights and our ability to infringe on that as employees and as as individuals involved in these issues. And so the committee, I think, was a fair representative. I serve on a lot of committees in this community, and you can never have everyone represented at the table. But we had a good cross-section, I think, of community individuals on the committee, and we had a number of meetings to pull this ordinance together. Let me say to you that I believe all of us that have worked on this did not come to the table with anti-police agendas. I don't believe we've added an additional burden, as I heard the gentleman say on the television earlier, to the police department and to the individual officers. I like to compare it to a few years ago when we were fighting to get cameras in the cars. That was going to be the worst thing for police officers that they are, and look how beneficial that has turned out to be, not only here locally but across the country, in telling the true story of police community individual interactions. For those of us in the community, those that are here tonight that talk about the subpoena power and independence of this, let me say, again, we brought, and there were, I believe, fair representation from the community that really fought for this as a part of the process. But I would say to them, as we talk about how to work this type of review board within the system of the city, you're not going to get the independence that you want. We really, from a community perspective, need to just go set up one without the city and the police department's participation if we want that kind of independence that I hear everyone really talking about. But the community feedback is really important. I think, we had a good cross-section, and I know the issue of felony convictions was really one that we debated and deliberated about quite a bit. We deliberated about how many police officers should be on and what's fair representation for the police department. So all of these issues, I think we did a great job of deliberating and finding a compromise to bring this ordinance forward to you. And then again, the FOP and the city attorneys have continued to massage it and work on it even further than how we left it when our work was finished. So I say all that to say I am here and hope that you support the ordinance. I think there's some real issue and debate around, how we're policing, how effective it is, how negative it is, how positive that it is, that warrants us to try to get the documentation to support, either from a community perspective that it gives that independence to community members, that here's something I can go to that's different than an Urban League or an NAACP or my church or individual community advocates. Here's something I can go to, and we need that kind of documentation because we really don't have it. So all of us from the community can try to tell you stories and incidents, but until we get this stuff documented, it's hard to prove it either way. And so this ordinance gives us a chance to get something in place to start the process of documenting how effectively we're policing in the community. So I would encourage you to support it and support the ordinance, even though it doesn't have all the things that we all wanted it to have. And so,
Mr. Parsons, I think we have a couple questions for you. Sure. Charlie?
Yeah, Mr. Parsons, thanks for coming and serving on the committee. One of the things I'm seeing in most of the comments that I've been jotting down here is a certain amount of concern that what's been presented to us in ordinance form is substantially watered down from what the committee recommended. How would you agree, or would you agree or disagree with that statement?
Well, I think it's been massaged to fit the FOP to get some sort of level of support. It's got the city attorney's involvement to have the legalese stuff balanced. So it's certainly changed and a little different and watered down. Maybe there's change certainly than what we put forward, and I understand how and why it got to that place. Again, I think if I spoke from an individual, there's a lot of things I'd like to see in there that's not there. But from a committee perspective and trying to find compromise on this issue, I'm comfortable with taking it forward.
Other questions? I just have a quick question. I know this came out, I saw it for the first time on Friday. Have you gotten a chance to actually read through the most recent version of the ordinance, or how up to date is your knowledge in terms of?
I got a copy of something, more than a week or so ago. So if something else came out on Friday, I did not get to see that.
Okay. I would encourage you to look at it because I'd like to get the perspective on task force.
It was my first day back in the office. So.
Yeah, it just came out, and actually we'll spend some time talking about this, so I don't think, so I would encourage you.
Well, I think you've gotten good community feedback we presented something to bring to you as a council for you to have a baseline for your discussions. And I think you've got good feedback from community members about some of the weaknesses. I think there's things that can be, again, massaged even more. But what I would encourage you to do is to get something for us to start the process, and we can continue after a year or so. We can look at and see where the weaknesses are in the ordinance, where the weaknesses are in the committee. There is no panacea, or each one of the ordinances across cities across the country are a little bit different to fit the community needs. That's one of the things I really stress for this is it's great to look at these models, but let's talk about what's best for Urbana. I'm working on the same issue in Champaign, and it's what's best for Champaign. We're independent that way, and you can't design what's best for Chicago here and any other city. So,
any other questions for Mr. Parsons? If not, thanks for coming out this evening. Appreciate it. I have two more members of the public. Andrea Antelov of 810 North Busey.
I read over what was on the website tonight for tonight's agenda. I assume that's the latest version. A couple of things jumped out at me. I didn't see a confidentiality agreement for people who are serving. It seems to me that might be necessary. Also, there's a provision to train and to appoint then train. I think it makes more sense to train pools of people to get a better understanding. A gestation period with the community, if you will, and then appoint from that group. Also, there's no format in what type of reports. Is this going to be, one person saying 3 sentences and somebody else issuing 10 pages? I've looked at other reports online of other places, and some of them are unreadable. There should be some kind of agreed-upon format if they're going to issue reports. And another thing is, I was kind of surprised to hear people complain about the false complaints issue. I was at a community meeting with someone who said, well, every time, I hear something, I just tell the police I hear gunshots. And I was just aghast. Because that's, A, illegal. It's illegal to make a false police report. And B, you could get somebody hurt. That hasn't happened here. In Decatur, I was driving down the road and I saw a billboard to a fallen officer. I don't ever want to see one in this town. So I think issuing a false complaint across the board is a false complaint. And another thing, all of this seems to be preceding something I think needs to take place, a period of gestation, if you will. We don't have any program in place dealing with youth issuing their rights and their responsibilities if there's a situation. I mean, the university does tons of this, but what is there with high school kids? What is there with the general community? I don't even see a flyer. Years ago, I saw a flyer somewhere, not in this community, but issued between the NAACP, the Urban League, and the local police department, talking about those things with people. I'm also concerned about issuing things and reports and meetings before elections. I noticed that the Peace and Justice Coalition was on UPTV like 4 times a week for months. I don't think this is really the forum for a bully pulpit for people to just speak out about general dissatisfaction. There's no shortage of places to speak in Urbana committees about general dissatisfaction. I would not like to see that. Like I said, I think there's a lot of stuff that should precede this happening, a gestation period for the community. This struck me. Here's Gazette, picture of the Champaign Police Department. Doing community interaction. I don't even know if we do anything like that. I would like to see some more of that happen before this takes place. This is an excellent example. The officers are helping some kid fix bikes. It's hard. 12 officers, only 12 officers in the Urbana Police Department are mentors. It's hard to get people to mentor. It's not hard to get someone to help the kid change a bicycle tire. In the Independent Media Center basement, there's a bicycle co-op, which would make a lovely, lovely addition to the Park District, should they ever get a community center going. I think that the police department, that would be a great way for them to work with the next generation. We are thinking very reactively. We're not thinking very generationally. There are going to be problems with this generation that are just not going to be solved by anything. Are we addressing the next generation? Are we laying the groundwork for what? That's all my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Anteloff? And the last person I have a public input card for is Reverend and Dr. Evelyn Underwood. Ms. Underwood?
Excuse my appearance. I just had to come. We had a conference call with the organization in Chicago and everywhere, but I'm sorry I'm late. I didn't get to hear everything, but I thought it was very important just to come, and so I'm here and I support it. The Citizen Review Board. I have not seen the latest information, but as Mr. Parsons said, that it's a baseline. Some of the things I've seen, I feel it should be stronger. However, I just want to let you know that I do support it. Essentially, that's it. and that's why I'm here.
Any questions? Thanks, Reverend Underwood. And I forgot to mention that you're at 1309 West Tremont Street.
In Urbana.
In Urbana.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone I missed? Is there someone who had a public input card? If you could, please. Thank you. If you could just state your name and address. Appreciate it.
I'm Reverend Charles Odell Nash Sr. I represent the Ministerial Alliance of Champaign-Urbana and vicinity. I also pastor the New Hope Church of God in Christ here in Champaign. I'm here tonight pretty much to say to this council that the community at large think it is necessary for you to take a serious look at developing a document that would make a difference. Not just put together something because the community is asking for it, but put together a document that would make a difference. As I listen to each one of the presenters tonight, I don't need to go back through all of the discussions of what should or should not be. But the question is, will the review board be the answer to the problem that we're facing in our community where the police department and the community is concerned? The answer is no. That is not the answer, but it is a right move. It is the right step towards building the kind of relationships that will make a difference. This Citizen Review Board will send a message to the community that we want the kind of relationship between the community and the police department where the citizen of this community will trust the police and the police department will trust the citizen. And we will get back to having a safe community to live in, to raise our families in. But if we continue to allow the police department to discipline themselves, then we're going to see this problem get worse. Think about it for just a moment. Take an honest thought. If you had to discipline your brother or your sister, how easy will it be? Be honest about it. How easy will it be for you to discipline your brother or your own sister? It wouldn't be easy. Well, that's the way it is with the police department. And we thank God for them. We need them. We want them. But we want a department that we can trust that will do the right thing. Look at what happened in Champaign. The young man was wrong. But the police department was wrong shooting in that house. What if a 2-year-old baby had been standing in the way of the bullet? I'm sorry, would not have brought that child back. It was wrong. We must not sit still and allow these things to happen and not address them. You was elected by the citizen of this community to do the right thing for all the peoples of the community, regardless of what their race, their religion, or creed, but do the right thing for all the citizens. And one of those things is to make sure that we have a police department that will police our community honestly for all the peoples, regardless of who they are. I support that. And I ask you as council members, don't just put together a citizen review board just because the community called for it.
but put together a citizen review board that looks like the community that Urbana is, and with a document that will make a difference. And if you can't do that, then don't do anything. It's time out just answering because of the call. But we must spend time, energy, and money putting together committees and documents that will make a difference. Build the kind of relationship between the community and the police department where if the police is walking down my street, I can wave at him and say, "Good morning, Sergeant." And he can wave back at me and say, "How you doing, Reverend?" And if he's hot, he feels like coming in and getting a glass of water because we've built the kind of relationship that makes our community the community that we want to live in, the community that we want to walk down the streets in, and not allow no one to change that. I ask you, councilmen, to think about it from that perspective and go back to the drawing board and put the right language in the document that makes a difference. You don't need to be politically correct. You need to be correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Ash, for your time. Any questions? Okay. If not, I think public input is closed unless someone else I've overlooked. Okay. Next, let's see. I guess probably the best way to address this is to open it up for committee discussion at this point, particularly if people have clarifying questions. And I do want to point out that the clerk, at my request, left copies of the 2 relevant pages of the FOP contract, the task force recommendation version, and a document that I prepared and sent out to you by email listing my concerns. So that is on your desk. Brandon, you had some questions?
Not exactly questions, but comments. Okay. Unfortunately, I have to leave early tonight. It was really good to hear people's comments, and I'm glad I was able to stay through that. I know one of the commenters, Mr. Ammon, said there was some tension in the room, and I didn't feel that at all. I felt this was really helpful to hear from all the citizens what their ideas were when they read this, what they thought would work, what they thought didn't work, and particular suggestions about ways we could change it. So this was really helpful to me, and I think there's more of this we need to do. I would just sort of say to the group before I pack up and have to leave here that I, at this point, wouldn't say that this is ready to go to council and go for a vote. I would hope that you all make the decision later on in my absence to send this to committee or to maybe send this to a smaller group. I think that when I watched the task force meetings that happened a couple years ago, they were incredibly effective because there were people from the police department, the administration, and the officers. There were people from the community there, and it was really good to watch the negotiations happen about exactly how this ordinance and how this process would work. And I actually think we need that kind of conversation, and I don't know whether this whole council, at just a normal council meeting, is the right forum for that kind of negotiation where people could sit down and talk through some of these details. It may be helpful to have some meetings to ask some of the task force members to come back and ask the chief of police and ask someone from an actual police officer again to join us and have that kind of conversation where we can talk through those details again. At this point, I share lots of the concerns that have been raised. I almost wish we could start with the task force version and only take out those things that we were legally obligated in our side letter with the FOP and our police contract to take out, so that we could have a lot more of the process and the sort of teeth, as people have called it, that were in that version. So that's my feeling. I don't think it's just ready to go and be done with. I do agree with what a few people said, that, yeah, we do need to pass something and we can change it over time. It's not going to be perfect, and we really are bound by those things we agreed in the police contract to. I don't think at this point we can reopen our police contract negotiations again to try to change some of the things that we've already agreed ourselves to, at least for the duration of this police contract. So those are my feelings. I hope to see this again in committee or in some smaller group discussions, and I hope that we can address many of these concerns the community's raised. Thank you.
Okay. Other comments from committee members or questions, clarifying questions? Charlie? Robert? I'm going to give
I would like to hear from legal, if I may, and their discussion about some of the ramifications of the document that is before us, and what some of the restrictions might be. Maybe it would be helpful for the general public to hear that from a legal perspective, and I think I got a pretty good idea of some of them, but I think it's important that they hear that as well.
Thank you, Alderman. I guess one of the most efficient ways to go about this is to maybe deal with the issues that seem to be common to a lot of the commenters, particularly the big issue regarding subpoena power. A lot has been made of the ability of this proposed body to be able to subpoena documents as well as people. I assume that we're referring to not only have persons come and testify before this board, but also to be able to subpoena in so-called evidence in whatever form it may take. The concern that I shared with the mayor and as we were going through and trying to make some modifications here is that a subpoena is a writ from the court. It actually has the power of the judiciary behind it when it comes from the court. Okay? What that means is if, let's say, a case is being litigated before a judicial body, a judge and jury, and one or the other parties subpoenas a person or subpoenas documents or evidence into the court, it has the court's imprimatur on it. And that means that if it is not produced or that person does not appear, the judicial body has some sanctioning powers. They can hold that person in contempt of court. They may be able to fine that person for contempt of court. They may be able to jail them in certain circumstances. The judge can actually send a county sheriff's deputy out to seize that person and bring them shackled into the courtroom. So one of the concerns that I had is if you give this subpoena power, and let me be clear that we can write that into this ordinance. If you give this subpoena power, how would you intend to use it? In other words, a subpoena is served on someone, let's say, outside of the city's employ, maybe a witness to an alleged incident, and it says you will appear on thus and such date to testify, and they don't show up, refuse, flat, not just fail to appear, but refuse to appear. What is the contemplated consequence of that? What power would the board thereby use to bring that person in? Would the chair of the board think that he or she might be able to jail somebody for that, or somehow have some other sanctioning power? If we could have a discussion at some point and narrow down or have a clearer picture of what type of real powers are contemplated and desired, I think legally I might be able to wrap myself around more that concept of having that power. Now let's talk about having someone from within the city. One of the many conversations we had about this issue of subpoena is that I'm trying to envision a scenario where this commission that has been formed requests the appearance of, let's say, a member of the police command staff or some other employee with the city, and them refusing to appear without there being some dire consequences, without subpoena. In other words, the chair lets the legal department, the human relations officer, the mayor, or someone else know that a certain city employee is desired to testify, at that body and them not come, refuse to come. I'm trying to visualize the scenario because without having that visualization, it's hard to imagine what we think we would do with the subpoena power. In other words, if it is a member of the police command staff or some other employee and they are subpoenaed and they still refuse to come, what is contemplated to be done at that point? And that's the part I kept waiting to hear. I think this word subpoena has been given this gravity, this power that is beyond what I really think it will produce for an administrative body, and that's what this would be. City councils may confer subpoena powers on administrative bodies. Okay, they may do that. I think it's a shaky proposition. I think it has to be very carefully crafted. I think the powers of subpoena have to be very explicit, not just implied or inferred to say, the body shall have the power of the subpoena without any clarity as to what that really means. And so that has been my concern, and that is one of the reasons that we left subpoena power out. One, because we think that this commission, as empowered by this council and the mayor, are going to get what they want. Number one, has to be just requested. You want a member of the command staff, you want of the police department, you want an employee or some other individual to come, you request it. But I think you need to think very, very carefully about what you would propose happen if someone does not comply. Because if you haven't thought about that and you don't know what you're going to do and you don't have any power to do it, then a subpoena is just a request. It doesn't have the power of the judiciary. And so I'm open to having that continued conversation about that, and so that can be firmed up and clarified. So I just wanted to address that one issue about subpoena power.
Okay, maybe we could take up that issue first. Charlie?
Yeah, Ron, to extend that a little bit, help me understand it. A good explanation, thank you. So you said that the city council may confirm subpoena power. What, and if it were done very specifically and very carefully, what kinds of consequences could the city council assign to not answering a subpoena?
That was what wasn't clear. We did some legal research, Todd and I, today, trying to answer just that question. We didn't particularly find anything compelling. There are primary sources of law, meaning statutes and case law, and there are secondary sources, which are treatises and things of that nature. So even the notion I'm sharing with you now of a municipality empowering a board or a commission to have subpoena powers was not found in any primary law. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, it's saying we didn't find it, and there's a vast, obviously, we have to pore over we were looking in the administrative code, I was looking at the state statutes. So more poignantly in answering your question, I haven't found exactly what they can do. I know that they can empower the commission or board to hold someone in contempt, but I don't know what would be the next step. When you hold someone in contempt, I can only speak from my experience as a litigator. That usually involves the judge telling someone to see the circuit clerk and pay them a fine, or it involves the judge ordering the court security to put that person in custody, or it involves a tongue lashing, or it could just be, I hold you in contempt and I'm going to reserve what we're going to do about it. And keep in mind now, there are two different types of contempt. There's civil contempt and criminal contempt. And if there's criminal contempt where you anticipate jailing someone, then that person now has rights to a hearing, and a record must be made, and they have the same rights as a criminal defendant now. And then you've taken what was supposed to be a review of what was going on with the police department, and now it's spun all the way off into some whole other animal. We're talking about now, can we force somebody to come in, and how are we going to punish them? I hope that answers your question.
Maybe to clarify, perhaps what might be useful is information gathering for our next step on this particular issue. And in particular, I think any investigative model, there's kind of like three models. There's investigative model, monitoring model, and the omnibudsperson model for civilian review. And so any city that has an investigative model in particular, and the other two models can include this, have subpoena powers. So for example, I'm looking at the ordinance of Santa Cruz, which I was looking at this weekend, and it says the CPRB shall have the power to subpoena witnesses, administer oaths, take testimony. Let's call San Diego and ask them what happens if people don't show up. New York City, San Francisco, Berkeley, Richmond, Oakland, Denver, Colorado, and Long Beach, California, all I'm pretty sure have subpoena power because they're investigative models, and they just wouldn't have that model without that. So I think that there's quite a few, like that's a legitimate question, what happens, and I think it's really important for us to look at what other cities have done. Dennis had a hand up, and then the mayor.
While the question of bringing forth witnesses to testify, is what we've been talking about, is there any problem with the other half of that, which would be bringing forth documentation?
One of the issues that was of concern is, some concern was made about a language which says that they shall have access to relevant documents. And so Alderwoman Chenoweth had expressed to me a concern about who decides what is relevant, which is a legitimate concern. Here's the issue. There is a case, I won't mention any names, but there's a case, criminal case pending right now where I happen to know that there are over 2,000 pages of police reports, lab reports, evidence sheets, statements, and for purposes of reviewing a disciplinary case, maybe a fraction of that would actually be relevant to any issue at hand. Certainly the body would not want lab reports on the underlying criminal case because that's not really what's at issue. What's at issue is what happened between that officer or officers and a particular individual or a group of individuals. So when we crafted this language, it was with an eye towards giving a certain amount of investigatory ability in terms of asking for documents, but using a scalpel and not a shotgun. We wanted to be able to say, if you want to look at a police report and see what the subject officer, the officer that's the subject of the discipline, did or reported that he did, or what one of his peers may have reported that he did, I believe that that can be legitimate. But if the body were to just say, we want everything, first of all, I think that's onerous. I think it's unnecessary. I think that it can run into issues of, frequently in police reports, there are statements from confidential informants where the police department has given, assurances that they will not be identified, and just by allowing someone to review it, their identity could be compromised. There could be issues of victim statements that have not been made public, nor necessarily will they if the matter doesn't go to trial, that I'm quite sure the victim, or maybe the victim's parents, as the case may be, or family, do not want certain information about that victim revealed in an administrative hearing. They just, there are these types of issues that come up. So, getting more back to the question that you have, we were trying to allow with this language to get to certain things that might be of use, real use, for the body to be able to determine systemically if there's an issue with the meting out of discipline. But again, if you subpoena someone, and let's say it's without of the city, it's from the outside, and you say you will show up and produce these documents, and they either tell you no, or they don't come, or they give you documents but it's not exactly what you asked for, or they give you some of it, who in this body is going to decide whether or not that person should be held in contempt, or if you even will have the power to hold them in contempt and what that will entail? So the same issues arise for bringing a person in to testify. Technically, it's a subpoena ad testificandum, as it is for having someone come in and bring documents in, which is usually referred to as a subpoena ducis tecum. So,
Do you see the purpose of the review board to be basically judicial? It's a review board, so it's reviewing a practice. But is it supposed to, is there kind of a fine line between the purpose and a judicial purpose?
Well, the model that we were following was we wanted to create something that was more of an appellate review. If you want to compare it to a judiciary, it would be that at some point a decision was made below, and that would mean with the chief and the discipline that he might have given an officer. And
this is where you could appeal it.
Right. This would be the point where after the chief has communicated to the complainant that this is what we've done, okay, or this has been dealt with, and they're not satisfied with the response that they've gotten, whatever it may be. Maybe they don't like the discipline, maybe they don't know what the discipline is, maybe they just want more information. Or some people say, I don't care what else you did administratively, I want that officer fired or prosecuted. And that didn't happen. Then they go from that point to the civilian review board. I think one of the things that the public and maybe some of the members of this body might be struggling with is that, what is this animal? Is it an investigative body that has initial jurisdiction over all complaints? Or is it a body that has sort of a oversight ability? They're taking more of the 30,000-foot view versus the 10-foot view.
And does it mete out justice or punishment? I think that's the question. I think a lot of people are wondering if this body can mete out punishment, and I don't think that's really the intent of this at all.
No, they cannot. I want to be very, very clear about that. This body cannot discipline a police officer. That is something that has been negotiated in an FOP contract. And one of the initial comments, I believe it was Mr. Dolinar that took issue with asserting the supremacy of the FOP contract over the ordinance. This body does not have the power to create an ordinance that undoes an FOP contract. To say that it would be legally challenged is to put it very, very mildly. It would fail. There would be no way that you can do it. Once you have gone through a collective bargaining process and there are rules and steps and procedures for disciplining an officer, and we're following those, we cannot create another ordinance that comes behind that and says, but we're going to create this commission or this board that can sidestep all of that and mete out their own punishment. It's just not going to happen.
Okay, Mayor, and then Lynn.
We've had the number of cities in California cited, but aren't California laws different from Illinois laws? And isn't there also a state law about discipline of police officers that really sort of limits
Well,
I mean, I think the task force started out thinking they were going to be kind of like judge and jury, and we talked over a year and came to the conclusion that really what the task force could do was look at the systems that the police use and see if it's a fair system. And,
That-
you know, not look at guilt or innocence of an officer, because the task force couldn't, or I mean, the review board can't punish an officer, because there's a state law on that, right?
Correct. It's called the Uniform Peace Officers Disciplinary Act, okay? And we are obliged per contract to abide by that. And I don't have the language of the act in front of me. I apologize to you for that. But suffice it to say that there are certain parameters that we have to work within in order to discipline a police officer. And we do not have the autonomy as a city to just create a separate body that sidesteps those issues and the contract that we negotiated, presumably in good faith. I can't speak to all of those cities, and Todd and I certainly are totally amenable to going and gathering information from those cities so that we can provide some information. You know, one of the things that I've done as a practice as an attorney is not just go get the information from the cities, but also speak to the various stakeholders and find out, is it working? Because other municipalities do certain things or have certain languages in their ordinances, sometimes you got to talk to the people behind the people, you know, the ones that are on the front line actually enforcing or using it, and ask them, is this working for you? And frequently you will find that they say, yeah, we had that, we thought it was a great idea at the time, but here are the problems. So I will try to collect information from those municipalities, kind of get it from both sides. Here's what their language says, and here's what they do in practice, and here's what they really think about how their ordinance is written.
Okay. Lynn?
In regard to both the current ordinance tonight and also your comments, Danielle, I'm pretty comfortable with the current ordinance as it stands. However, having said that, I think you've made some comments in here specifically with regard to community outreach, some council reporting, and the literacy issue that I would be very amenable to having changed. I think what I'm not supportive of is this issue of the subpoena power, because I think that what we need is here in our community, of 38,000 people of Urbana, Illinois, I think Tracy mentioned it earlier, you want to match the design of the ordinance to the community. And I don't want to use a sledgehammer when we need a tack hammer. And I think that this ordinance gets us on the right path. It's something that our chief supports. And I think it will do a lot of good. And as you stated, Mayor, the purpose of this, and we talked about this as a council a while back, that we wanted this to be something that we used as an oversight of really the chief and his activities. And if the chief isn't taking care of business, then it's our responsibility to, to take action. So it's it's more collaborative, and it's not it doesn't have powers of punitive powers. It's the 30,000 feet look. And so I think what you wrote here is very consistent what I believe we spoke about as a group. Again, I think there are some tweaks that we could make to add to it, but I think generally I'm pretty comfortable with this.
May I add something else to this discussion? One of the other issues that came to mind for me when looking at what kind of model this proposed body would take is that if you're an investigative body, meaning that you are you get the first look at the complaint and you go about the business of investigating it and meting out the punishment, let's just say, I think you'd have to have a professional staff. I think you would have to have, I don't know that given people's lives and that they have careers and work, I don't know that you could have a body that just meets occasionally in the evening time. I think you'd have to have people who were committed and almost hired to do this. That's number one. And number two, there's the issue of, we approach this from, this is going to be a trigger that's pulled when somebody is dissatisfied with the chief's resolution, and we presume that they will be satisfied with it. That's the presumption. It's a rebuttable presumption, but it's the presumption that someone may look at what the chief has done and say, I'm fine with that. You know, the chief may have, it might not even involve discipline. It may have been an officer that was impolite to a suspect or to a person pulled over for a traffic violation. The officer apologizes and the person's like, I'm satisfied. Now, if it gets to be something that is really serious, someone has gotten a beating, their civil rights have been violated, that type of issue is going to be of a nature that I don't think that you're going to have to worry about facts being hidden from view. It's all going to be very well publicized. There's not going to be any way that the chief, if he has any instinct for survival, will want to ignore. And I, as the attorney for the city, which and by the way, I believe the chief has that instinct, you know, and I, as the city's attorney, would also have a vested interest in protecting the municipality from further litigation, which could be avoided if we handle the disciplinary issue properly up front. In other words, we have an interest in making sure that if there's a problem officer who has issues with anger or use of force or any other issues that might be violative of someone's civil rights, that we deal with them up front. It's a new world out there right now, and I have had to sit through federal trials, federal litigation where police officers are being sued for violation of civil rights, and it's ugly. Something to be avoided.
I'd like to actually ask the mayor to chair this, because I don't feel like I can be chair and be as involved in the conversation as I'd like to be. So, Mayor, if you would take the chair, I would like to be recognized.
I probably have a conflict of interest, but I'll do it anyway.
I think what's hard for me, there's a couple of things that's difficult. First off, the chief, to respond to what Lynn said on the subpoena power issue, the chief was supportive of the task force recommendation, which clearly gave subpoena power to the Civilian Review Board. The model that came out of that consensus process that Mr. Parsons was speaking about was a hybrid model, both with some investigative powers and some oversight powers. It's that model, that hybrid model, that I understood was our consensus when we discussed a year ago these issues. And that was a model that we went into the FOP negotiations with, and what we came out of it with compromised that to some degree, but not entirely. And then the model that was brought to us today is a model that's merely a review process. There is no more investigative piece, simply because you're only reviewing the set of documents that the police provide you. At that point, I feel like that's not an independent body. There's a couple of things, I think, I feel like, you know, I'm in an art gallery and you all are on one side of the sculpture and I'm on the other side of the sculpture. So let me just tell you what I see that might help. First off, with the former chief of police, not the current chief of police, who's been very responsive, I asked for police policy as a council member. I didn't get police policy on various things. I was working with a constituent whose cousin was bleeding and she was asking the police to call the ambulance, and according to her testimony, the police intervened, took her and threw her on the ground, and she was charged with resisting arrest. She filed a complaint, and I followed up with the chief as a council member to ask where that complaint was at, and I never got an answer. As many times as I followed up, I felt like I was in that circle that Bart was talking about. I just kept being sent around in the circle. So that's one thing. I've served on council under a different mayor where this council has voted to direct staff to do something, and they haven't done it. And so that's why, you know, that's a different point of view than perhaps the current situation. If we had trust, we wouldn't need a Civilian Review Board of Police. You know, that's the issue. I wish we were there. I wish we were there. Honestly, I wish that this wasn't necessary in many ways. But under the circumstances, it is. I'm working with people in Champaign, and this is, you know, these stories are not written up in the News Gazette, so you don't know about them. It's very frustrating. I'm working with the boy who was stopped on the outside of the park. They said he was there after hours. I actually called the park district. They said it was not after hours, but the sign said it was, so who knows. And he was charged with resisting arrest. His lawyer has yet to receive the police report. That happened months ago, and the attorney's trying to get the police report. I'm working with a youth who was put on the ground by police officers in Champaign. These are both Champaign incidents where she was taken to juvenile detention, pleading that they would call her parents. She was taken away from the school to the hospital and then to juvenile detention with her parents never called until she got to juvenile detention. Her parents have yet to get the police reports. We're in a situation right now in this county. In this county, police reports are secret. As of January 1st of 2007, they are secret. And the reason why is because all of the police reports for every case used to be in the courthouse. And as of January 1st, the state's attorney, who I've met with to discuss this issue, has made a choice to take all of the public documentation, discovery related to a case, and no longer make it public. Perhaps this had to do with the Myers case, where the Independent Media Center was involved in looking at that court documentation and talking about multiple incidents of torture. Surprisingly enough, 2 weeks after that press conference, none of the information is there anymore. So at this point, a police officer, both during the trial and after the trial, that police report is never put in. According to Supreme Court 415C, the police report is never even allowed to be given to the defendant. A defendant who's sitting in prison trying to, you know, who is or in jail trying to assemble their case because their public defender has a caseload of 3 times what the Illinois State Bar Association said is okay for them to have, is trying to assemble their own case, and they can't even have the documentation, and they're allowed to see it if their attorney shows them. And we have issues where attorneys won't even show them the discovery against them. So police reports are secret at this point. Nobody can get access to them. So if this, with all of that experience, you know, if the CPRB cannot compel evidence, it is worthless. It is completely worthless. And I will not support it because it makes us look like we're doing something that we aren't doing. We're simply not doing. We have to compel. I would hope that it would not be the case. I would hope that what you said was true. But in Champaign, the Champaign police strangled Greg Brown to death. Who knows what happened in that situation? The News Gazette ran the press release from the police. They never did an investigation of that piece. We had eyewitnesses who talked about Greg Brown begging for his life. That has still not come out in the press. And then we find out only because of a civil case where Greg Brown's family sued the police. We only find out at that point, years later, that the city council has settled with the family in that case. So, yes, I would like to know that if there was excessive use of force, that we would actually see we would see some transparency. And I do believe that Urbana, in terms of transparency, has been better than Champaign, but I think that there's definite issues here, too. And I'm the person for 6 years people have come to and asked me to do something in cases where they have filed complaints and they haven't heard back from the chief. I've been the person for 6 years, and people don't get, you know, sometimes they hear back, sometimes they don't, and we're sent in circles. And so I think I just can't possibly move forward. I was told that subpoena power would be part of this. We were told throughout the FOP process that was being preserved. And I really see it as an affront. I see it as an affront that it's missing. I understand the concerns. I've spoken to our attorney, and I've said, let's sit down and work through this. But honestly, I can't imagine moving forward without something that compels evidence. I can, unfortunately, imagine a situation in which documentation would not be provided. I think the CPRB is the entity that has to say what they consider to be the documents they want to see. It's not that hard. They just say what they want to see, and staff prepares it through the human rights officer, et cetera. We're able to get that. So I think there's that issue. There's also issues in terms of timing that it's really important. For example, for us to say civil action is threatened and therefore we can suspend proceedings, that's just I mean, I've seen that before, and I'm not going to, I can't support that. It has to be the case that there are certain timelines on things. If we were designing for the best case scenario, I think that the ordinance that we have would work. But we actually can't design for that. We have to design so that there are not loopholes in our ordinance, just like we design with any traffic ordinance or any of our other violations. There are many ways for there to be loopholes, so I think that we need to be looking at that. I'm particularly concerned with public access to information, especially after looking at other ordinances. In fact, most ordinances, like Iowa City, San Diego, and Berkeley, you know, it's open. I do think there could be, they're open sessions. The hearings are completely open except for when medical records are being discussed, when personnel is being discussed, and when minors are involved. But I think that, you know, perhaps there are times when witnesses or complainants wouldn't come forward if it was a completely public process, and I think it should be up to the discretion of the complainant. And I know with the Iowa City ordinance, if you look at that, that ordinance actually gives the complainant the option of having certain things be closed or not closed. I think that officers are public servants, and therefore things other than medical information and personnel should not be closed. They're public servants. We pay for them. We don't pay for complainants in the same way. So I think we have to specify very clearly. We have this statement in there that says that members cannot say anything about, quote, all CPRB proceedings and deliberations in perpetuity. Even the FOP version, which they gave to us, is not that strict. The Champaign's version that they're looking at right now, I read, it's not that strict. It has to be the case that CPRB members can talk about generalizations and trends, formal findings of complaint at the time that the finding happens, and they should be able to raise procedural concerns. If they feel that there's coercion happening under the current ordinance, they would not be able to speak to anyone. They would actually be breaking the law, our own ordinance, to speak about procedural concerns to counsel or whatnot. So I think that that's a real particular concern. I think that the CPRB has to see the original, a copy of every single complaint. They don't necessarily have to discuss it, but they should be receiving copies of every complaint so that they can look and see if there are patterns. Otherwise, they're only getting things that are filtered through the department. I think that the council has to be apprised of differences between the CPRB and the chief. And I'd like to look at the community outreach piece and bring some of that back. Certainly, I mean, I'm working with people right now who either English is a second language or they actually cannot write sentences, and they are talking to me about concerns they have with the police. So it's very important that they be able to dictate to the HRO, and the HRO be able to, you know, read it back. I also think the whole advocacy piece that was in there is now gone. It's gone. And I think it's absolutely important that a complainant be able to have an advocate present, and that there's lots of examples of that. From other cities. In some ways, I think some of the arguments I've been hearing since we started that FOPP process is this isn't possible, this isn't possible, this was really hard. But then the second I look at other ordinances, it's in there. And so I'm confused about that, and I'd like those addressed. The thing I'm particularly concerned about, in addition to subpoena, is the false complaint issue. I could not find a single other city that put a threat on the document saying, if you submit a false complaint, you could be prosecuted criminally. I think it's important that they be told that, and that it be not intentionally threatening. I think under the current ordinance, it's intentionally threatening, and it should be in the educational component. In particular, I think it's really important that we add that the mere finding of a complaint is unfounded or not sustained should not be misconstrued as a false complaint. I talked to a woman who, I hate to say what police department this is, who said that there was a drug bust in her house. She was in her panties. It was 5 o'clock in the morning with her children, and she asked if she could put her clothes on, and the police said would not let her put her clothes on, so she's sitting in the middle of the room surrounded by men with her panties on, and she's asking the question, can I put my clothes on? And she said no, and then she said, you're too pretty to be hanging out with this drug dealer. She's afraid of putting forward a complaint because she is afraid of retribution. That's the kind of thing that I talked about. I also talked to another person this weekend, same issue. He said, well, my neighbor told me not to file a complaint because he filed a complaint and then the police came in and they shot up his window. Who knows if it was related? Who knows what? That's just the word on the street. That's gossip. But it's important to know that that's what the perception is, and that people have to know that they will be protected. They will be protected if there's retribution for them filing a complaint. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers that people have to filing a complaint, is that they feel that there will be retribution. So I think that we need to, my proposal was that every police contact with a person after they file a complaint be recorded with that complaint, so that the chief of police and others can see, okay, here's this person. And I will mention Patrick Thompson's name because I think it's relevant. The moment the police found out, and they found out before his own attorney found out, that he was given a new trial because of incompetent defense last year, he was put in jail. He was actually stopped with a traffic stop, told he was resisting arrest, and put in jail that night. The state's attorney would not charge him. She knew it was bogus. Week later, same thing happened. He's got traffic tickets. I mean, I can show you the list of traffic tickets and stops that he's gotten since his case. He has faced massive retribution for videotaping the police in this town. I wish these stories were not true, but they are true. So we have got to stop acting like somehow that this is, kindergarten and we're all going to just get along. That's not the situation that we have here. And we have to listen to people in the community and understand that we have to have something that is not based on trust. It's based on, as the referent explained, it's based on clear documentation. So I would propose that we send this to committee to discuss it again, and I have offered to meet with the Human Rights Officer and our attorney to meet that out. There can be up to 2 council members or the mayor at that meeting. I invite someone else to join me, and perhaps we can work out some of these. I'm not exactly sure how else we could move forward.
There's a motion by Ms. Chenoweth.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lewis. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
Do you want to share it again? Sure, thank you. And thank you for hearing me out. Are there other folks, committee members? Charlie, would like to speak?
Well, I think between what I've heard from the public, Danielle's comments, other things that have been said here, it's clear we need to, this needs to go through some gestation. I am disappointed that we've moved so far from the draft that came from the task force. And I'd like to see, like Brandon said earlier, us move back to including more of that. I think a lot of what Danielle has said in hers gets there. The idea of a hybrid model, if we can get there, is more attractive to me than just the appellate review process, which it's a valid model, but I'd like something a little more progressive than that. So I would support efforts to move in that direction. Thank you.
Heather.
Danielle, I heard you make a comment about the fact that once people reviewed these, that they wouldn't be able to talk about it. And I guess I kind of I'm thinking that you have a mixed bag. You want subpoena power, and yet you want people to be able to talk about this. Juries don't talk about the cases. They're actually asking, when they are on the jury and they're in deliberation, they don't talk about the cases. And so I'm kind of hearing you say you want subpoena power, but you also want people to be able to talk about what they're reviewing. And so I think that's kind of a mixed bag, and I think you need to carefully think about what you're asking in those two situations.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to, there were a lot of things that you put out there. I wish I could have addressed them as each one came up, but I just wanted to say that, Todd and I are in agreement that, what's before you now is presented without passion or prejudice, and we are open to reviewing some of these things. We do have responses. I don't know how productive it would be for us to go through section by section and explain why things are the way they are, but it was not done for light and transient reasons. It was done with a lot of thought and a lot of meetings that we had. There was no attempt here to try to weaken the ordinance to the point where it would be meaningless. I actually find legislation without any effect is kind of a waste of time. But we do have some considerations beyond what you've said, and with all due respect, some of the issues that you brought out are being mixed in with this review process that would not be solved if we took even the task force version and just submitted it whole like that. Some of those issues that you talked about kind of are painting a picture about this ordinance that's not necessarily accurate. Those issues regarding police reports and the ability of defendants to get those will not be solved with this ordinance. There are processes to go before a court or judicial body that does have real power that can provide those things. So I just wanted to share that with you and say that I look forward to us having our own discussions about how we can make this something that you can live with.
Thank you, and I just want to say I appreciate your time with this, and I have a lot of respect for the time that you did put in it. I think in part we need to probably sit down and walk through this, and so we'll make a time to do that, Mayor.
I think it would be very helpful, since these issues have been raised at a public meeting, for the attorney and Todd Grant to go through item by item. I think it's too late in the evening now, but I think that would be useful. I mean, you can have a small conversation, but we do have the Open Meetings Act, and I think since people have expressed these concerns, it would be good to have them answered at a public meeting.
The other comments about, it sounds like this will come back to committee and we can address them point by point in a public way as well. And I can also have some questions answered privately, and we'd be happy to share the responses to those questions. Any other comments from the committee members? Okay, if not, we stand adjourned. Thank you for the long evening and patience.